Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Ask an Introvert podcast. This is part of our mini series on friendships where I invite my actual friends from online and in real life to interview on the podcast. Today with us, we have Cheryl. Cheryl is my friend and business coach, and I will let you take it from here and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here. Thank you, Jennifer, for having me on. I'm super excited to chat about topics related to friendship, making friends as an introvert, perhaps even loneliness, and all the sorts of topics that tend to come up as adults, introverts who are trying to make friends. A quick bit about myself is I am a coach, side hustlers to grow their online businesses in a time efficient and simple manner so that they can ultimately make time for all the other parts of their life that matter to them. And I also have a podcast called the Side Hustle Club Podcast.
And I'm gratefully a guest on that podcast for a couple episodes too. So definitely check that out. One of the things that Cheryl helps me make time for in her capacity as my coach is my friendships. Friendships matter to me, and I know they matter to Cheryl too. How do you go about making friends as an adult now?
That's a great question. The first thing that popped into my mind is a particular anecdote. So maybe I'll start there. So during COVID times, about 2020, 2021, I was in Hong Kong and my partner, my now husband, he lives in Singapore. So while we were separated for almost 2 years during the pandemic, I knew that one day I would be able to go to Singapore and see him again. Um, and at that time, I thought, well, if I eventually know that I'm going to move over anyways, and I will reunite with my partner one day, I might as well try to make some friends in Singapore because everyone else that I know in Singapore are my partner's social circle or his family members. So during the pandemic, I went on Instagram and I just sought out other people who were doing cool things on the internet and I would connect with them on Instagram. And I think one thing that's interesting to note here is that some people who are more private or more reserved, they were definitely a bit taken aback by who is this stranger messaging me out of nowhere? And is she trying to sell me something? Whereas other people were much more receptive and open and curious about me. So I think that's perhaps something that we can dive into later. But one way that the primary way that I currently make my friends as an adult introvert myself is through the internet. Because I will admit that when I was younger, when I was in high school, college, and post grad, I did not make the effort to make friendships besides studying all the time, which is one of my regrets in life. But now, luckily, I do have the internet to supplement my life that way. So that's primarily how I make friends these days.
Thanks for sharing that, Cheryl. Do you remember how we first met?
We met on Clubhouse of all places.
Yes, Clubhouse is that audio-based platform that I don't use anymore. But I got out of it way more than I could have asked for. So many friends made on that app.
Yeah.
Do
And it's
you?
so interesting because today the Threads app exploded everywhere. So
Yes.
maybe we'll be making more friends from Threads.
Yes, I did post on there. I said, so how do you make friends over here? It's going to be really interesting to see how the app pans out.
I think I'm currently like brewing on how we met on Clubhouse. I believe there was two instances I recall.
Mm.
There was one time me and a friend who was also doing cool things on the internet. We were hosting a room. I think it's called room back then, a Clubhouse
Yeah.
room. And then you were just listening in, and then we connected on Instagram afterwards. I think we had some DM conversations on Instagram. And I think the second instance was when I and another person hosted another Clubhouse room about K-pop music. And
Mm.
I excitedly asked you to join us, I remember very clearly.
Yeah, the first room was you and Joanne, and I think talking about personal branding and thought leadership. And I did participate in that one. That was my first interaction with you. Yeah. And then I remember the K-pop one too. Different generations of K-pop we were talking about.
And I think it has been over 2 years now since that first interactions.
Yeah, 2.5 years now.
For the audience who may be
Oh,
wondering, we are currently staring at each other on Zoom, just reminiscing over these good times.
well, I think the dynamic that the two of us have is that we do pause a lot and reminiscence or process or think, and we just nod and stare at each other sometimes. And that's
We
normal
do.
in our friendship.
Yeah. And that reminds me of the first day we saw the morning after the first time we saw each other in person. We
Yeah.
just we just knew we could be in each other's presence without speaking.
Yes. Did you have any hesitations about meeting me in person?
I mean, I knew you online for at least a year at that point,
Mm,
and I think the trust is very strong for both of us.
yeah.
So I think meeting you in person, it was not there. I mean, I think just like anyone, like we would get butterflies before meeting a new friend, or not a new friend, but meeting a friend in person for the first time. But definitely, besides that, there wasn't any like hesitations or anxieties or fears. It was it felt very organic and natural. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree too. At that point, you weren't the first online friend that I met in person, but we did meet in a way that was both on our terms since, you were flying to LA and I was going to pick you up, and then we had booked a place to stay together at. Whereas a month before that, or just a couple weeks before, I flew to a different friend's place where she was staying with her boyfriend, and then I met him for the first time, but I still stayed at their place. And sometimes I'm like, wow, like the trust built with online relationships can be really, really strong. So I wanted to ask you, as you made friends online who are based in Singapore, would there be any tips that you would want to share with others?
I think I'll share my experiences and what quote unquote worked well for me. So I want to point out that the friends that I did make, they have some sort of internet presence, public internet presence, I should say. So I think for them, it was not unusual to get a sudden random DM message from a stranger on the internet. So I want to point that out first, which is I wouldn't go about messaging people who have completely private accounts. I think that would be very unsolicited for the other person. But I think for what worked for me was that I would just scroll around on the Instagram app and I would search coach and Singapore and just see what pops up. And I would look through the content and the ideas that the person was sharing. And if I was genuinely curious about, wow, like this person is so interesting, I really like how they think, we would then start a conversation. And we might even hop on a Zoom call at some point down the line. But I think it really started off with me reaching out, making the first move. But specifically, I would start the message with, hey, I read this post of yours, or I listened to this IG live that you did. I think it was called IGTV back then. And I would highlight some of the points that they made that I really enjoyed. So I really did make the effort on my end to actually learn about the person and then reach out and say, hey, I really like the work that you're doing. Thanks for what you do. And even literally this week, I have been on a vlog kick where I've been watching a lot of vloggers in Singapore. Some of them don't even show their faces in their vlogs, but I've been enjoying these vlogs and I would reach out to the person on Instagram afterwards and I would say, hey, I just watched your vlog on YouTube. I really liked how you were eating this thing at this place. It looks so good. Thanks for what you do. So that's basically my way of introducing myself and just being in their energy and being in their presence.
I love how even just in your voice recounting your story right now that I hear how excited you are to connect with them and how truly interested you are in what they're doing. And I think that's more of a subtle nuance to how to approach people online, that the interest has to be genuine. I wanted to touch more on your kind of the disclaimer you started off with, and it's that you approach people who already had public presences. If for someone who doesn't have a public presence themselves, how do you, in your shoes as someone who is a public figure, how does it feel to you when someone who is private reaches out to you and you can't stalk their profile or find out anything about them besides what they share in conversation?
I do get that. Not often, but it's not uncommon for me to get messages from people who have private accounts. I will say that if they message me with a sincere comment about, hey, like I really resonated with the story that you shared, I would be more than happy to reply and just say thank you and express my gratitude for them taking the time to even go through my ideas and my thoughts and my content. There are some instances when the person who sent the message, it is basically a spam message. And in those cases, I don't reply. But I think to your point earlier, the sincerity can be easily felt and picked up by anybody.
Yes. I think that energy goes through in messages for sure. Sometimes I do feel like hesitant to reach out from my profile because if my goal is to befriend someone, I don't want them to think that I'm soliciting them as a client. But then I go for it anyway because my desire to be a friend or make friends is bigger than what they might think. And if that's what they think of me, that's what it is. I can't really control that.
Yeah, I definitely second that. I think if we know our intention is genuine and they perceive it completely the other way, there's nothing else we can do. We we know our intentions and it was to start a conversation or build a potential connection or just saying thank you for the work that they do.
Yeah. So, Cheryl, I know you've lived in a lot of different places. How do you navigate making friends and maintaining friendships as you move around in your life?
Social media has helped a lot. Definitely the childhood friends before the age of social media, I am not really connected to any of them. But for those who we met at a time when social media became a thing, we definitely you know what's interesting? It's that when I was in the same vicinity as them, so maybe when we were going to school together, I actually don't think we were as close as now. I can actually think of a few individuals who we technically went to high school together, we went to university together, but at the time we were close, but we didn't actively meet up or talk to each other on a regular basis. But interestingly, now that I have moved away, and then when I would go back and visit, we would actually meet up and have a very in depth conversation and really have a very like meaningful time together. So I think also one thing that was surprising to me is that as we age and mature and go through more life experiences, we can actually deepen friendships with people who we previously thought we weren't close with. So that was definitely something very interesting for me.
Yeah, I agree on as we gain more life experience, we get closer to people who we weren't close to before. Just for me, one of the things to navigate as an adult was mental health and it declining for me. And in high school, I could not relate or understand what it meant to be depressed. All I could do was listen to my friend, but a part of me just didn't get it. And I felt really bad for not getting her. And at times, I remember saying dismissive things to her because I didn't have that understanding or that perspective yet from life experience. And like 10 years later, I went through it myself and I'm like, "Oh my goodness." And in that moment, I was like, "Do I reach out to her and tell her? Like, what do I wanna say? Do I wanna apologize for something that past me did? Or and then I pause because 'cause I'm like, "Wait, but then that's just about me." Like, if I'm gonna show up again in this person's life this time, how do I want to support them? And so I didn't start with talking about the topic or my own guilt and all of that. I was like, I think, this individual and I, we had a good connection and I want to rebuild that. And this time around, I know that I can be a better friend to her. So I approached it that way.
Yeah, and I'm super curious since I just remembered that the original question was how did you keep in touch with
Mhm.
people as you moved around? So for this friend, how did you reconnect again? Did you reach out through social media or how did you
I still had her phone number.
Oh,
And then
right.
yeah. And then my backup plan was to go on Facebook. Yeah. I don't
I
really use
see.
Facebook anymore, but there's a good number of people on there that would probably be really easy to reach. And sometimes I have friends who message me through Messenger. Um, I guess in a way, I'm the problem because I've changed my phone number like 3 times in my adult life. But there's lots of ways for them to find me. Yeah, so friendships have ups and downs and lows and highs. And over time, you can grow distant and grow close again and grow distant again. Um, I'm curious for you, what feelings come up as you go distant from friends?
Loneliness is the first word that comes to mind. I would say that loneliness for the majority of my life has been the most prominent feeling I grappled with. So I think whether, and I think physical distance actually isn't, I think when I'm physically close to people, I feel more lonely. But then as I am physically apart from people, I would then make more efforts to connect with people. So although the first word that came to mind as you asked that question, the first word that came to my mind was loneliness. But then as I'm speaking, I'm starting to tease it apart. Actually, when I'm physically close to people, loneliness comes up a lot for me. Such as if I'm in a school setting. When I was in my school years, even up until graduate school, loneliness was a very prevalent feeling. But now that I am physically like more on my own, I work from home now. I spend a lot of time alone. I actually don't feel alone or loneliness as much.
That's really interesting because I think generally people think when they're surrounded by people that that's how you avoid loneliness. One of the things I want to parse out is like alone time and loneliness are two different things, right? And as introverts, we do need time and space to ourselves to recharge. That's our alone time. And so it's rare that alone time feels lonely. It sounds like for you. And it's the same way for me. But what if you feel lonely in your alone time and when you're surrounded by people?
I can definitely think of my early 20s. That's when that was the case. When whether I was with people or without people, I would still feel a strong sense of loneliness. And I think it was because at the time, I didn't have any individuals who I would consider a close friend. I was in relationships, like romantic relationships back then, but it's, I think the individuals that I was with romantically, I think we didn't have the the depth of conversation that I would really personally like in a friendship. So I think for me back then, why I felt lonely so often, whether I was surrounded by people or by myself, was because I didn't have individuals who I would really consider close friends, who I could go to when I really needed someone to talk to. the only person at that point in time was the person that I was dating, and we were having a lot of dating problems already. So I think that's why now that I've grown and matured significantly, I have now been able to see that number one, I don't want to rely on my romantic partner or now my husband for like everything. And it's also important to have some other friends who I could go to. But also, I have conscientiously made efforts to develop and cultivate just a few friendships that I could really lean on and rely on during times when I really need it.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, loneliness is a I used to think it was more heavy to talk about, but I think it's important to share it now and to address it directly. I think it hits a little bit differently for different people. And as I hear about I think one thing that I can draw a pattern from between what you just shared and what I've heard from others and myself and how I want to analyze it is as we come into adulthood, our friendships become more complex, in part because we start pursuing different dreams and different lifestyles and we start moving at a different pace. Whereas, like, prior to graduating university or college, we're all shuffled into the same timeline and have the same structure. And we repeat the same things and go through the same things. Even at varying success levels, what's important to us is the same. And then when all of that changes, for me, that's when I started to feel really lonely in adulthood, was watching my friends do different things. And suddenly I feel like, oh, I don't feel close to them anymore, or I don't get them anymore, or they don't get me. And I learned over time as my interests changed, sure, it would be nice to have friends who do the same thing, but that's not exactly necessary either. In my closest circle, yeah, I have friends that I talk to entrepreneurship about, friends that I talk to coaching about, friends that I eat with, friends that I travel with. But instead of looking for all of them to have exactly all the same interests as me, I see it as like a support ecosystem. And they all have different meanings to me and they all contribute to fulfilling friendships in different ways. And that perspective has helped me feel less lonely, taking away the expectation that anyone can be everything for me.
That actually made me think of something as well, which I just want to add on to everything you just said, which is you mentioned, oh, I can't remember your exact words now, but what I suddenly thought of as you were speaking is that, and this honestly is why making friends as an adult is so important, is because for me personally at least, I find that the friendships I made when I was younger, they were not as strong as the friendships I've developed as an adult now. And to your so I think the reason why is because previously we were kind of in the same environment, so we were naturally not forced to make friends with each other, but there was more there was limited options among the friends we could choose from. But now, even though I do think that the options are endless and but also at the same time, depending on the person's circumstances, making the first move and figuring out who do I even make friends of, where do I even start, that can be very overwhelming. But I think that the positive silver lining here is that when you do make friends as an adult, especially as an adult introvert, they are good friends. Like they are friends you will be with for a while, for a long while. That's my experience so far. So I think so total side tangent for the audience here. This is why Jennifer's course, making friends, is so important. Because the friends you're gonna make as an adult now, it's you're gonna be with them for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd also like to add as you make friends now, you have one, you have more life experience and you know yourself better now. So the friends that you're going to, you know, depending on who you are, if you're gonna pursue them directly or if you're gonna enter in spaces and call them in, they're just going to be different because yeah, I'm pausing because, like, I'm also thinking about my older friendships, my longtime friendships, and some of them have evolved with me, and some of them haven't. But when you make friends now, it's not by, like, who's in proximity, but it's a very intentional process.
I want to chime in and add one more thing,
Yeah.
which is for anyone who might be listening to this right now and maybe you've navigated like intense feelings of loneliness throughout whether it's younger days or like adulthood. I just want to offer the possibility or what's possible, which is now in this day and age, making friends, especially post pandemic and with internet. I think that for me, as someone who really felt so lonely for so many years, and now to feel supported and loved and very grateful for the people that I have in my life, both online and in person, I just want to offer the thought that this is very possible given the current world circumstances and the technological tools that are available to you. So I think I just want to add that on as well.
Thank you for those words of encouragement. So, if the audience has listened to a few of these, they'll see that I'm friends with the coaches that I end up working with and navigating two layers of relationships, a coach client relationship and a friendship. How do you go about that?
I let me speak for myself as both a coach and as a client. So I will start with me as the coach. So I've worked with a number of individuals who I have had the just absolute pleasure of meeting in person. And some of them are in Singapore right now with me, and some of them are overseas, such as yourself. But we literally hang out as on a friend to friend basis. And I think this is something really interesting to some people because they're like, wait, but you work together in a professional capacity. How can you be friends? I think I think it will depend on the individuals, but I do think that perhaps me and Jennifer, I would say are similar in the sense that we both are able to compartmentalize coach brain and friend brain. Like we know when to turn off the coach brain and turn it back on. So I think for me, there is, and I think Jennifer also, like, I think we, because one thing as a client that I feel sometimes is that the coach wants to maintain strong boundaries with their client and it's completely up to them. But for me personally, I value the relationship with the person so much. And I don't see myself as better than or above or more put together or more half of my life together than a client that I might be working with. I honestly see us as equal. And where possible, if we have the opportunity to hang out as a friend, I would love to do that. And I know Jennifer, I think you're the same. So I think it does depend on the individual coach. But I think for the coaches that you work with who genuinely wants to be friends with their clients, they will know when to turn on and off their coach brain. So I don't think it's much of a concern for either parties because I think the boundaries will be very clear. As a client, I let me think. Are there any coaches I worked with who I'm now a friend? Well, actually, right now I was friends with someone, and actually, no, there's two people. There's two people that I was friends with. One of them is in person, one of them was virtual. And then they both offer a certain coaching service. And after being friends for like a year or two, I then said, hey, can you help me out with X, Y, and Z? And so I think friendships and coaching relationships are very distinct. And I think if you choose to pursue a friendship outside of the coaching container, I think it is very possible. Obviously, it does depend on both parties' boundaries, but I think if it's a mutual friendship, I think it's very easy to separate. And I also think one more thing I want to add is also making friends in the containers that you're in. I think I have also made a number of solid friendships from the containers that I was in. So I think It's because if we are drawn towards working with a coach, they will likely attract people who are similar to yourself. So I think one thing I've personally found is that I've been able to make several good friendships from the group programs that I was in myself.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've made Yeah, when you wanna work with someone who has a community or a coaching container, your values probably match up with theirs, and they're attracting people who have the same values too. And so I've made a lot of good friends through group programs or communities like that. And there are also closed communities that are free. You Yeah, you don't have to be working on the same goal, but you can have the same values. And a key one that I know we're both in is Asian Wander Women. Yeah. And it's for Asian women who wander, essentially. And there's key values of looking for freedom in their life and living and essentially going against the status quo and redefining what life means for each of us beyond corporate jobs and capitalistic things. Yeah. So I think you're so right that it depends on the individuals who might want to be friends and having good boundaries and defining those. Like I remember, let's see, I've worked with you for a while, but it's on and off. And I remember as we got closer as friends, I was like, dang, I still want to work with Cheryl, but I have a hesitation. And like, is this going to affect us or does yeah. And I know there are some coaches who have clear boundaries, like I'm not going to coach my friends or I'm just not going to be friends with my clients. But I think sometimes if there's just another layer of connection there, it's kind of hard to avoid because people who align with you so much, who just add so much to your life, I think sometimes no matter what the formality is, we can look at how to reform that boundary in a different way.
Yeah. I think especially if there is someone who has a skill that you would like to learn from them, or they have certain skills that can support you, I think you should work with them. And then if there's also the friendship component to it, you could look into that. But I think they're very separate things. And I think two different relationships can be formed with the same person.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think the easiest way is just to approach, like when it comes up, just approach it and bring it up directly. I have one client that I'm friends with in the sense that we always try to meet up when we're in the same area. She's based across the world, but we've met up in LA a couple times. So that has been really cool. And to any client, I would love to meet you in person. But I will say right here, please don't expect our friendship. If it happens, that's really beautiful. But if it's not, maybe we're just not meant to have that relationship with each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And if Jennifer has the skills that you want to learn, you should totally work with her.
Thanks,
Total
Cheryl.
side tangent. Total side tangent.
Yeah. If you're looking to make friends, maybe in the group course for making friends as an adult introvert, you can make other friends in this close community. But however you want to navigate your friendships and whatever friendships you actually want to have and grow in your life, I can help you. Thanks for that, Cheryl. Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to share?
Hmm. I think one thing I want to sincerely say to the audience, in addition to the previous thing, which is no matter what your friendships, history, track record look like, or loneliness track record look like, things can change. Now, as an adult introvert, it can 100% change. I really legitimately thought I would be like, to be very honest, there was a period of time in my 20s when I thought one day I'm just going to change my name and move somewhere in the in the States and just disappear and like start over in my life. Because I felt it's such a deep sense of loneliness and I felt like I just wanted to start from scratch. But that's not the that's not how I feel anymore. That's not my experience anymore. And that's why I'm the second thing I wanted to say to answer this question, which is why I'm such an advocate for what Jennifer is doing to teach people how to make friends as an adult introvert. Because as someone who has really felt very intense feelings of being alone and like I don't think I have friends, and to now see that my life has drastically changed and I find so much joy in the connections I do have, that's why I sincerely hope that to anyone who is listening to this right now, if you are wanting to learn this skill, this really life changing skill of making friends today in this day and age as an adult introvert, you should really consider working with Jennifer. And I'm saying that because of my own personal experiences and seeing how things have changed for myself. So yeah.
Oh, that's so cool, Cheryl. Now, for anyone who has felt connected to Cheryl in some way, I would love for you to get a chance to connect with her. Would you like to share more about what you do and where we can find you online, Cheryl?
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram. My username is Cheryl Theory. My last name is not Theory. It's just my Instagram name. So that's where you can find me on Instagram. And you can also find me on my podcast, which is called the Side Hustle Club Podcast.
Awesome. I will drop all of those in the show notes as well. Great.
That was great. I guess we can
Yeah.
stop recording then.
Yes. And in absolute Jennifer Cheryl style, that's how we ended the podcast episode. Very straightforward and direct. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you in the next episode of Ask an Introvert podcast.